Australia, the sixth largest country on Earth. An ancient, rugged, and unforgiving land with abundant animal life, both beautiful and deadly. Found within its awe-inspiring landscapes and natural beauty exists a deep history of unexplained mysteries for anyone with the courage to investigate them. Tonight, we join Ben on a journey across this vast island continent in search of answers to events that have reshaped the lives of so many that have been exposed to Unexplained Phenomena Australia. With your host, Ben Hurl.
G'day everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unexplained Phenomena Australia. It really is good to be back after that extended break that I had during February and March, and there's been a hell of a lot going on in my paranormal world. So this weekend that's just gone, I had the great fortune to be able to visit the location of the 1980 Rosedale water tank incident that occurred on a farm, Whiteacres, where a UFO came and appeared and basically terrified all the stock at 1 o'clock in the morning. And the farmer got up to investigate, and he saw this UFO hovering over a tank, and the UFO drained 10,000 gallons of water, spooked the stock, and the principal witness, George Blackwell, he got very, very ill as a result of that for about 8 days afterwards. So it's quite a big case. It did make the top 10 in the world at the time. So it had everything in it. It had trace cases. It had animal effects. It had effects on the witness. It was really highly credible UFO encounter. So during the week, I had the opportunity to, and I actually had the referral from Guy who I spoke to on the previous episode about the Tinamba circles. So he knew the owner of the property in the local area, and I gave me her phone number, and I was able to ring them up, and they let me come down there to walk through that property. So I've now created a video on that, and we'll probably do another episode on that down the track too, because there's a real lot to talk about that, and the fact that I've been there now adds another dimension to that case. But that's on my YouTube channel, Ben Hurl, if you want to check it out before I do the episode. So, been a very big weekend. It's Anzac Day over here in Australia, so it's about 11:28 a.m. On Tuesday at the time of recording. Got the day off, public holiday. So I sort of thought to myself, well, it's a great opportunity to sit down and look at Australian UFO reports, to talk about that with you, the interested listener who tunes into this program each week as we go along. And I thought this week we'd have a look at another case that is also like the Rosedale water tank incident in 1980, an extraordinary encounter. Now, a little bit of perspective. This one actually occurred in September 1978, so 2 years before the Rosedale incident. And the locations are very close. So this is all within my neighbourhood area. So I've got a vast range of UFO and Yowie reports and everything like that have come out of my backyard here in Gippsland in Victoria, Australia. So this particular case was in September. Now, the significance of that too is the fact that 1978 was a very busy UFO year here in Australia. And in October, on October the 21st, 1978, Fred Valentich, if you may remember, the pilot, and his plane disappeared over Bass Strait. So that whole September, October, all around then was a big UFO period, or a flap, if you want to call it, down here in southeastern Australia and Victoria specifically. So that's the background on where this particular case sits in the grand scheme of things. Now, Briagalong is one of those little hard to pronounce and hard to spell little places where there's nothing much actually there. In fact, my cousin has a cafe there, just as an aside. So that's interesting. But it's just a little tiny little farming community with a main street and a hotel and a couple of little shops, one of which is my cousin's cafe. And it's near Mafra and it's near Tanamba, which is the one we spoke about last week, the Tanamba Circle on the ground, if you listened in for that. Or if you haven't, check out that episode as well. So this is all in very much the same area. At the Rosedale water tank incident, that's also in this same location too. So I'll just give you a little bit of an orientation on that. So for those of you who aren't in Australia, so here's the map of Australia, or the bottom southeast part of it. You've got Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne there, Victoria. Now, just to the east where that little orange and white little circle is there, for some reason Google Maps didn't throw up a drop pin, it threw up that. That's maybe it's too small to justify a drop pin in Google. I never thought of that before. That could be the reason why. But that's where Briagalong is. So it's in East Gippsland. It's in the Wellington Shire, which is just outside of my shire, but still very close by. And that's the location. And it's about just under 3 hours from Melbourne as well, away to the west. So that gives you that location. Now, this map here brings it all into a little bit more perspective. And if you look to the right of the map, you'll see Bairnsdale. That's where I live. That's where I'm broadcasting from right now. And if you look across to the left a little bit further, there's Briagalong. And just down from that's Mafra. And then there's Sale and then Rosedale, all that little area there. So the White Acres water tank incident occurred between Rosedale and Sale. The Tanamba one was just near Mafra. And the one we're going to talk about today was just north of Briagalong, where you can see the Great Dividing Mountain Range there, just within the boundaries of the Great Dividing Range. So that whole area is very, very paranormal active. And UFOs particularly have been very active in East Gippsland over the years. So, and just another little reference point too, that where you see Sale there, just in the center point of the map there, around Sale, that's where the Sale RAF base is. So there's an Air Force base just there as well. So I'm pretty sure that plays into the UFO story. Additionally, one of my other theories too is the fact that I have had my own encounters out here in Gippsland. Is that there could be some sort of a portal around this area as well, potentially, if you believe in that type of an angle. I'm just open-minded. I don't have any preset ideas, but there's a lot of UFO activity around that Sale Mafra area in there. It's a green, lush dairy farming area, and there's a big irrigation, McAllister irrigation scheme through there. So it's very green and lush. Lots of water around in that area. Beautiful part of Gippsland. So you can take a photo there and put it on any cheese packet or milk carton you like, because it's just total dairying area. Now, Briagalong's a little bit different. That's sort of a little bit drier up there. It's not as green and lush as the Mafra Hayfield Sale area there, and you can see that on the map as well. It does sort of dry out when you get to Briagalong, more of a sort of a you sort of get into your stringy bark tree forest areas, things like that. A little bit of a drier climate, so slightly different. But the case that we're talking about today is just extraordinary for the amount of time that it went for, September 1978. And what happens in it is also there's some really interesting aspects at play within this case, and I'm going to talk you through it on this episode. So what happened? Now, this witness is an extremely interesting man. His name's Eric, and he is actually Austrian, just like Arnold Schwarzenegger. In fact, he lived a town over from where Arnold Schwarzenegger was, and I believe he told me that he knew the Schwarzenegger family. So that's how close he was in Austria to where Arnold was from. And he was also a child during the war, and he actually got to see Hitler when Hitler came in to annex annex Austria, he was lined up on the side of the road and he saw Hitler's cavalcade drive past. So he saw Adolf Hitler as a child. And after he grew up, he emigrated out to Australia. And I did make a video with him, and he has a very thick Austrian accent, which is really hard to deal with. And even in the video, it's hard to understand him. So I thought, rather than show the video, I'll talk through what actually happened, because he's got a very thick accent. You got to really listen to understand. But this is a picture of me and Eric. So this was in 2015. So it's quite a long time ago, back when I was in Victorian UFO action. That's hence the T-shirt that I'm wearing at the time. And me and one of my other teammates, Lana actually knew Eric because he was a friend of her father's. So that's how we got to connect with him and speak to him about this case. So we were very fortunate in that regard. Now, the other reference for this particular Briagalong incident was it was showcased in this book, which is called Great Gippsland Mysteries by Grant Robinson. Highly recommend tracking down a copy. It'll be out there in your usual bookstores or Amazons or those sort of places. You can find these books online. Highly recommend it. It's right from centrally in my area where I live. Has a lot of great stories in there from Tasmanian tigers appearing on the mainland, ghost stories, from Gippsland, UFO stories. So it's if you like mysteries and the paranormal, it's a great little local book. And I do believe it is still available out there via Amazon or maybe even eBay and those sort of places. I have a copy here somewhere, but it's it's in my library somewhere. So that's the book that I had first heard about. And it's the only book or only reference to this case anywhere is in the Greater Gippsland Mysteries book, and the video that Lana and I made with Eric back in 2015. That's why I look a bit younger and not quite as chubby as I am now. So Eric wasn't the only witness to this case, and we were going to do another video with the secondary witness, but it just never happened. He was willing to do the interview, but over time we just never got round to syncing up with him to make it happen. So from 2015, when we shot this video, through to now, we still haven't spoken to the second witness. And the second witness was Eric's godson, whose name was Steve. And Steve was around about 11 at the time of the incident. So he was much younger. And how he became Eric's godson was that Eric worked with his father at the Maffra milk plant there. They were workers together, and they became best friends. And he worked there for many years, as did Steve's father. And Eric became Steve's godfather, which was lovely. I don't know how much of that goes on these days, but back then. And what the plan had been was, Eric is an avid deer hunter, and I've been to his house, and he has a room, and it is full, or chockers, as we say here in Australia. It is full of deer heads and deer antlers everywhere. I did take a photo of it back in 15, but I've lost it somehow. It's disappeared. Quite a remarkable room. And it's not just like one or two deer heads. It is just full of deer heads. So he, on this particular morning at 3 a.m., so pretty early when they got up, he decided to take his godson Steve deer hunting. So he picked Steve up in Maffra, and I'm just going to show you, we'll bring that map back up again. So you can see, if you look to the right of the screen, you've got Bairnsdale, Sale, Maffra, Briagalong. So they were in Maffra. They were going to drive out north of Briagalong on that map. They were heading out that direction. Now, they headed to a place called Valencia Creek, and that's just to the west of Briagalong, probably where that road just has that little dog leg in it, out around there. He was going to go out that way. But the problem was, Valencia Creek was flooded at that time. And here's a still shot from the video when we took Eric, because we interviewed him at his house, and then we took him out he was kind enough to come out to all the key locations with us, and we were able to shoot footage with him out there. So we took him out there, and they drove up to Valencia Creek. This is at 3 o'clock in the morning, or sometime thereafter, having left Mafra. And they saw that the creek was flooded. The bridge had water over the top of it, and Eric wasn't prepared to drive across. Now, that actually was the shortest way to go to get to their hunting ground. But they had to, and it's called Freestone Creek, that little creek there. So they had to hop in their car. They had to turn around and come back. So if we look back at the location map again, they had to go all the way back down to Briagalong. So they were north of Briagalong, had to come back to there. Now, as they had left Valencia Creek, this is still very early in the morning, they came back over this rise here, you can see, and there's a house up on the hill. Now, as they got there, Eric said that they could see, both of them could see this red light in the sky, a red light with a white kind of a dome on top of it. And it was sitting about the height of a water tank that was on a stand. In fact, that's what he thought it was. He thought it was actually a light on a water tank stand. But as they drove past, they both commented on this light because it was a lot bigger and brighter than you'd see on any tank. And farmers generally don't put lights on their tanks. They're not high enough to trouble aircraft. So that's not something that happens. So as they came back down this hill, they noticed this light. Now, as they travelled back towards Briagalong, and from that house to Briagalong is probably about 10 minutes or so by car. When you go back down, head back down the road, and you turn left, takes you back down to Briagalong. When they actually started driving down that hill, the red light started to follow their car. In fact, it travelled next to the car. It had swung around over the road, and it came around onto the driver's side. In Australia, we drive on the right-hand side of the car. It had come onto the right-hand side, and it was pacing their car as they headed towards Briagalong. They both commented on it, looking at this light that was just sitting off to the right-hand side, and it just kept pacing the car. Eric sped up, he slowed down, he did all that sort of stuff, and the light did it with the exact same timing as he did it, almost as if it could read his thoughts as to what he was going to do. The light just stayed purely with the car. Put the brakes on hard, it stopped instantly, accelerate, it went with him at the same time. So for 10 minutes, this red light paced the car as they headed to Briagalong. Now, once they actually got to Briagalong, or just before they got to Briagalong, the object took off ahead of them, and they thought that was it, that this strange light had disappeared. But what happened was, when they got to Briagalong, in this picture here, you can see the blue building with the red roof in the centre of the picture. That's actually and the hotel, which is next to it. There's an old shop there, and the hotel, and there's a beer sign coming out of the top of Eric's head. That's the pub there. That's the road they drove down towards the intersection. When they got there, this disc craft was hovering over the intersection. So this is probably around about, I don't know, getting towards 3:30 in the morning in the AM. And he said it was hovering just about at the telegraph pole height, silently sitting in the center of the intersection. Now, as the car pulled into that intersection to give way, there's a stop sign there, you can see just past my face there. When it pulled in and stopped there, the object suddenly darted down at the car. It shot down at the car like a bullet. And Eric thought it was going to actually hit the car. But it shot down at the car, and then it sprang back instantly to the location of just above the telegraph pole where it was sitting there. So this UFO, in an instant, shot down like a darting magpie swooping to protect its young. It darted down and straight at the car at a blinding speed, and then it shot back up into the position above the intersection again. Isn't that interesting? That's interesting. I find that fascinating, that it could just go like that, down and back up. It was almost like it was trying to intimidate them in some way. It was almost like an aggressive action by by this strange craft, and I'm deliberately holding off showing it to you until the end because it's gonna blow your mind when you see it. So they stoically decided that they would keep on heading out on their trip. They're going hunting. They're going to do what they're going to do. You wouldn't turn around for a UFO. You'd keep on trucking. That's what you'd do. So he turned. I'll just take you briefly back to that photo. This one. So when he got to that intersection, he turned left. So to where that building behind my head is there, that grey building with the peaked roof and the chimney. He turned left and headed down that direction. Now, the object started pacing them again. And when it paced them, it just followed them along. And when they got to the intersection where they turned left, there's a gully. And the object took off that valley where I'm pointing, where you can see me pointing in that photo. The object just shot straight up that gully. And Eric and Steve were turning to the left. So it was a parting of ways where the UFOs checked them out, it's had a look at them, and then it's shot straight up that gully. And they've turned to continue on their journey. Now, seemingly that's, in their mind, the end of the encounter. It was a strange thing that happened on the way. Funny thing happened on the way to the games, the Colosseum, that famous old saying. And Eric and Steve turned the car and headed up Marathon Road, where they were going to go and commence their hunting. Also, they thought. So when they drove out there, something really extraordinary happened. When they got to the location, which is here, the UFO was hovering just to the left of that old abandoned house, about 30 meters off the ground. It was hovering at the exact gate that they were going to go through. And this is me and Eric in 2015 standing at that gate. And Eric just pulled the car up and they both sat there in disbelief. And they were he didn't describe them as being terrified or scared, but they didn't want to really get out of the car. They just sat there, and the UFO was just hovering to the left of that old building there, 30 meters or so in the air. And they sat in the car, and the UFO sat there. It just sat there. They didn't really know what to do. They didn't drive off. They didn't do anything like that. They just sat in the car. Now, the time had sort of gone past by the time that they'd come to this area, and the dawn light was starting to just come up over the horizon. And something really strange happened at that point. From underneath this UFO, something started to come out of the bottom. And it was actually some sort of probe. It was like a cylinder came out from underneath I can't do my hands here. It came out from underneath the UFO, and it tilted like that, and then it went off in that direction, and it flew across the valley, this probe that had come out of the bottom of the craft, and it flew across the valley, and at the head of the valley, it seemed to go down to the ground, and it was hovering just above the ground, about 600 meters away from the mothership, from the UFO from which it had gone. And Eric and Steve sat there and watched as this probe traveled its way slowly and not that high above the ground, right across to where the valley started to rise up again at the end of the valley like that. The valley goes up like that at the end. And it sat out there for a few minutes. This thing, they could see it in the distance, just lighted up, just sitting there, just hovering above the grass or the head of the valley. Then this probe, after it sat there for a while, it then came back, and it went back to the craft. And they watched as the probe returned into the UFO. UFOs just sitting there silently. They sat still, frozen, and Eric said that Steve was a little bit scared, but they both didn't want to leave. And they watched then as the dawn light started to come up a bit brighter. They watched as this craft slowly, very slowly, started to ascend up into the sky. And he said it went up very slowly. It didn't go up like, it just went up at a nice, really slow drifting pace like this. So for all its speed and darting around the valleys and gullies and pacing the car and zipping around the place, it just slowly sort of rotated and they watched it go right up until it was just a pinprick of light with the sun reflecting off it as the sunlight came up, and it went away. Now, this is the hill where it went to. So where we're pointing out to, across that range there where the tree line is, the object, the little probe, came out and was just hovering above the ground out in the middle of that, where the gully comes up to the top there. So that was Eric pointing that out in the video. Now, this other map gives you a bit of an idea. So this is the gully that it went up. So Marathon Road is on the left, that where all the trees are there. There's a bit of a turn in the road and a big hill you go down, massive hill. You go down that hill, you travel along, and then just after that dam area, there's a gate where that measure of distance starts. There's a set of yards there, and the little house is just off to the right of that as well. So that's where it started, and the probe came out of the UFO and it drifted all the way across the valley to about the point where the measure ends, around about here, where it sort of has that bowl, that sort of bowl type of amphitheater enclosure at the end of the valley there. So that's where it went to. Very fascinating. And then once the object had ascended, they basically went home. So that's the basics of the story. It's quite an incredible and prolonged UFO encounter over several hours between two witnesses, and both of them are A-grade guys. They've got no reason to make up stories at all. And I'm now going to show you a picture of the craft. So if you have been around UFOs for a while and you're familiar with types of UFOs, then this one should look pretty familiar to you. Here it is. This is Eric's actual drawing of the craft, and he's done a stellar job of drawing it. Now, what does it remind you of? It reminds me of the sports model by Bob Lazar. That's really what it reminded me of straight from the get-go. This is a classic sports model UFO that the two men encountered. Briagalong, of all places, in Victoria, Australia, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night. This is what they saw, this perfectly beautiful, classic flying saucer. Now, if you can see at the top, it's got the glow coming out of the top. And at the bottom, he's even drawn the dimensions of the probe, this cylinder that came out of the bottom. And I think it's 1.6 meters, I think is the estimate on it. And he's saying that, if you can read those dimensions, but maybe a bit clearer than me, he's guessed that the height of the dome's about 1 meter, 2 meters across, 14 to 15 feet either direction. So it might be about a 30-foot UFO overall in its size. Row of lights around the outside. And he said at the top of that probe, he's written there was a starlight, or what reminded him of starlight, at the top of the probe. Isn't that an incredible picture? It's really quite schematically drawn by Eric as a UFO that he saw all the way back in 1978. So, I mean, I haven't seen Eric now for I only really met him the once in that time, and he was in his 80s then, so I'm not even sure if he's still alive, but that was an incredible picture. It's well worth dwelling on that image because it is such an iconic image, and he's drawn it so beautifully and with such artistic skill. And that shows you that it's obviously burnt into his mind what he saw at that time. It's a And as I said, it's a pretty well an unknown story. So if you do want to watch the video, it's on my YouTube channel, which is just Ben Hurl. You can probably find it out there. And it's about, I don't know, maybe a 20-minute video with him. He's as I said, his accent's quite thick, but it's always interesting to listen to UFO testimony from witnesses in their own words. And I actually thought I'd lost that footage. I hadn't seen that footage since I'd taken it back in 2015, and I only found the old camera that it was on the other day, the old little Sony camera, that early video camera that we had at the time. And I opened it up and I took out the memory cards, which are old files now. My new computer wouldn't my new editing program wouldn't acknowledge them. They're old MOV files. So I had to go online and get a converter and convert the files to MP4 and all that kind of technical geeky muck around stuff that I hate doing. But it was worth going through the trouble. I even paid for a one-off membership to do this conversion to get this old footage off the old camera, so I could bring it into the modern format and remake a video, which I made a couple of weeks ago. So it's on my little YouTube channel, Ben Hurl. You can see it there, along with my Rosedale incident as well. I've only just started using that channel. It's just been a little scrap channel that I made years ago just to do a couple of art videos on at the time, but now I've just started reusing it and throwing up a couple of UFO videos. So if you YouTube Ben Hurl and scroll down through all the lists, you will see it there, and you can watch that video if you think this has been an interesting and fascinating case. Which, of all the ones I've investigated locally, this one and the Tanamba one and the Rosedale water tank ones, they're all really high quality cases, and as old as they are, back in the 70s and the 80s, they still have a great impact today in the 21st century. And at the moment, none of that's happening anymore. I can't explain why that is. Why are none of these cases like this occurring to this extent? You still see UFO photos popping up around the place and that type of thing, but these reports just aren't cutting through to UFO groups as much as they did back in the day. So that's the story of Eric and Steve, and quite incredible. And that, as I said, that UFO is just something else. It really is. It's just what you'd expect to see when someone says they've seen a UFO. That image just about comes to mind every time for me. That's what they're talking about. That classic style of disc. And I think through what I've seen with this case and the case on the weekend, the Rosedale one, the power of these objects, the absolutely impressive performance that they demonstrate to the witnesses, who really just by pure happen, chance and luck happen to be in a particular location at the right place, right time, or wrong place, wrong time, depending how you want to look at it. The performance of these craft is just beyond spectacular. Like, interestingly, how on earth did that craft know to go and wait at that gate? The actual gate they were going to turn off into. How did it know that? How on earth did it know that? And in the Rosedale case, which I did on the weekend, this little laneway that the UFO's gone up. There's two dams on that laneway, but it didn't go to the dams. It went to the open-topped concrete water tank and took the water out of the open-topped water tank, not the two big open dams that are sitting there. And you'd say, well, why on earth did it do that? And my theory was that I thought, well, maybe the object knew that the water in the tank was going to be more pure than the water in the dam, where there would be sticks, leaves, bits of barbed wire, God knows what else in the water, in the old brown dam water. So the UFO went to the tank and sucked up all the water out of the tank, where it knew there would be no sticks, stones, and anything like that, and it just purely took the water. So, very intelligent, very much know what's going on in the environment, in the tactile environment when they are here, wherever they're coming from, whether they're coming from other planets or whether they're coming from other dimensions. All that can be discussed. Wherever they come from, they come here with exhibiting extreme maneuverability, intelligence that suggests that they can read our minds, even from the craft. They knew what he was doing, where he was going. I find that a really incredible aspect of this particular case, that the craft, it was no fluke that it turned up, and from where they parted ways to where it is, it's still a 20-minute drive. That's still another 20 minutes, half an hour to get out to where the gate is from where they left it there. That's still a half-hour drive. How on earth would the object have known to be hovering over the exact gate? I find that amazing. And also with the Rosedale case too, when the farmers saw the UFO come along around the corner, go down the laneway, it took 2 minutes from the time that he first saw it to when it sucked the water out of the tank and it was sitting on the ground. That was 2 minutes of time. It drained 10,000 gallons in under 2 minutes and sat on top of that tank for probably a minute. And in which time, in a minute, it drained a full 10,000 gallon water tank. It's like magic. It's just like magic. How do these things do this? So it's all the mysteries that we love, and that's why we investigate these things, and why we've done so for a very long time. There's technology and development that is far in advance, far superior to us. And this is 1978 and 1980. It's practically prehistoric times. When you even look at it today in 2023, from 1978 to 1980, that was so more primitive back then. You didn't have mobile phones, you didn't have internet, you didn't have all the technology, digital world that we've got today. None of that existed back then, but all these terrific cases were occurring at that time. It's just so frustrating that we're not seeing those high-level encounters appearing as much now. Or the other difference today also is the fact that back in 1978 and 1980, you had very limited reporting channels to go through. You could go to the media, who may or may not give you a fair hearing, depending on who you got, and whether they were going to treat the story as a joke or whether they were going to treat it seriously. And there's good examples in the media in the past where they've given UFO reports fair treatment, and there's the ones where you get the Google factor and everyone was drunk and stupid. So, or you could go to UFO groups. Back in 1978 and 1980, you could approach the Victorian Flying Saucer Research Organisation here in Victoria and Queensland and all the other places. You could go to your state UFO group, but they were very limited reporting channels back then. Just didn't have it. Fast forward to today, and people can report this thing to a vast amount of potential, we'll call them investigators. And usually it's just on social media where everyone's opinions chimed in, and no serious work is actually done in the field anymore to the extent that it was done in the past. Now, there's still plenty of people out there doing good work, plenty of investigators in Australia, America, right across the country who do investigate reports and do a great job. But the point I'm making is that with the modern social media world, it's much more just as we say, clickbait now, isn't it? Like, come and have a look, and no one really goes any further than that. Takes the trouble no one really hops in the car and drives to a location and gets out the measuring tape. It's done a lot less now than it was back in those days. So, and the other problem with that is that UFO groups are such fractious things now too. Like they come and they go, and you get good people, people who do investigate, people who don't investigate. So it's just never been a real consistent thing, particularly. What I would say, various states have had various groups over time. They've gone, some have come, some have gone, some are still here. It's just not a consistency that's out there. All these records get scattered to the wind, and such investigated that, and so investigated that, and then all their information disappears, or parts of it get published, parts of it don't. So that's the big frustrating side of that. So here in Australia, I like to be a little vacuum cleaner and try and pick up whatever I can find, whether it was an old newspaper report, an old journal, an old witness, someone just happens to mention something. You never know where it's going to lead to. And of course, we're always open to new cases and new new events as well, but they just tend not to be as good as these older cases were. So that's a very interesting fact. So now I've also got a couple of other little cases to talk about as well that I've just discovered through my readings. Now, what I like with all my readings and things that I look into is that when I go investigating, looking at old journals and all that sort of stuff, there's just so much good stuff out there, but it's all getting lost. Not everybody has got the Australian UFO bulletin. This is basically just A4 copied paper, which is how they used to make it back in the day. And if you look inside it, it's just stapled A4 sheets of paper that are put together. This particular one is December 1994. So even as late as 94, we were still producing this type of mailable little document, the Australian UFO Bulletin, even with the surface mail already put on it. So that's what we had back then, and the internet was pretty not so advanced back in 1994. So this was still the way that people reported their cases, and as I find these, I read them all the time. Now, normally when I do this show, I put about 4 hours research into it and so I put in 4 hours to get 1 hour, but I haven't got that sort of time available at the moment to do that sort of research. But I still like to flick through these little books, and every now and then I find something that's quite interesting. And there's a lot of cases that are just lights in the sky, and it was off to the northwest, and it appeared there, and they did this, they did that, they split up, they came back together, and then they all shot off, and everybody went ooh-ah, and that's a very common type of report, which doesn't translate that well on this type of a show, where it's always fascinating for the witnesses who see something in the sky that they don't know what it is, but you need something of greater depth to talk about. Now, I found a couple of interesting little reports in here. This one's from 1994. I'm just gonna read it. So this is a yacht and a UFO, which is quite interesting. Now, it was actually a letter to the editor, and it says, I was crewing a 37-foot ferro cement yacht from Australia to Africa. While on night watch, somewhere between the Cocos Islands and Diego Garcia, so just for a bit of geography for you all, that's the Cocos Islands are out here, out on the left of that photo, all the way out here. Christmas Island's over there, and the Cocos Islands are here. So this is where we're talking. So it's off Australia. It's out in the open ocean. And this gentleman was on night watch on this boat, somewhere between the Cocos Islands and Diego Garcia, at about 2 to 3 a.m., so which I always call the Goldilocks hour. A beautiful night, very slight wind, calm seas. The yacht as good as sailing by itself. No clouds, moon, and lots of phosphorus in the water, that little element that lights up in the water. It's quite beautiful and magical when you see it. I've seen it myself in the local lakes around here. Plenty of starlight, being able to see the horizon all around. So an all-round beautiful night out on the Indian Ocean. Suddenly there was a glow on the mainsail of the boat. Spinning around, expecting to see the last smoking tail of a meteor, instead I saw a flying saucer about 200 yards astern. Our yacht was 37 foot long, which made the masts about 50 feet. The saucer was hovering about the same height at the top of the masts. It was slowly keeping pace with the yacht. It was not glowing as such, but seemed to be reflecting starlight. It seemed to have a highly polished surface, and the witness described it as like mercury, that really high reflective sheen that you get when you look at something like mercury, highly polished sort of a look. There was no sound from the object. The only sound came from the breeze in the rigging, the sails, and the water moving along the sides of the yacht. Now, how eerie would that be? You've got this perfectly beautiful, calm night at the ocean, just the noises of the boat, the light breeze, this massive flying saucer hovering above your boat, not making a damn sound. Like that's really eerie. So, and the witness said that he felt no fear, but actually admired the object. Then the thought came that I had to go. Well, I couldn't leave the yacht by itself, so I left the cockpit, went down the steps into the cabin. Everybody was asleep but the skipper's wife, and she half turned over. I said to her, "Mary, are you awake?" "What is it?" she replied. "I've got to go, in case I'm gone too long. Please ask Wally," who was the skipper and her husband, "to take over my watch. I'll make it up to him when I get back." I then left the cabin, up the stairs, and into the cockpit. Almost seems like he's in some sort of a trance. Now the saucer was right over the stern, much lower. I stepped up onto the seat, the deck, then standing on the stern rail, holding onto the rigging and reaching up to touch it. I didn't touch it, as it was about 6 to 8 inches higher than I could reach. So this massive UFO came down right. And if you look at that picture, you can see him standing on the stern, the rear of the boat, looking where this object has come right down next to the boat. Fascinating. Next thing I knew, it was nearly 5 a.m. and the dawn colours were on the eastern horizon. I was sitting on a corner of the cockpit that I'd never sit. The skipper was steering. I told him what happened and he made some sort of rude, sarcastic remark, so I never mentioned it to him again. When breakfast was ready, I went below and asked Mary if I'd spoken to her during the night. She said yes, but knowing we were hundreds of miles from the closest island, I knew you wouldn't be going far. I then pulled a sheet of paper out of an exercise book and attempted to draw what I saw. Our yacht being 37 foot long, I estimated the saucer to be twice that of the yacht, at least 70 feet in diameter. So that's an incredible story. I've never found that anywhere else, only in the Australian UFO Bulletin from 1994 where you find that. It's just a really great report that you're just not going to find. So that's why I like to be a little vacuum cleaner, hoovering up all these great little cases that are great to bring out. I've got another one for you. This one's back in Australia, and it involves an object like this. Whoop, there we go. Might have seen something like that before in the UFO literatures and journals. So this was actually in Victoria, where I am, on the Western Highway on the 18th of February 1992, and the investigating reporter was Paul Norman, the famous Viewforce investigator. He really was our Fox Mulder here in Victoria for a very, very long time. He's passed away now, but he did a lot of UFO research here in Victoria. So this is also in the Victorian UFO Research Society book of June 1997. And he writes that they received a report of a sighting which occurred on the 18th of February 1992 of a triangular object 5 times larger than a stealth bomber. It was reported by a retired Government Department Archives researcher. The sighting occurred near Ballarat, which is in central Victoria, over the Western Highway. The time was 8:40 p.m. The colour appeared to be designed as night camouflage, black underneath with stars arranged to mimic stars above. Now, isn't that interesting? As it flew directly overhead, the wing spread was about 500 feet wide. 500 feet wide. That's 150 metres. The highway is about 300 foot. The impression of the observer was that it was mapping. That's an interesting statement, wasn't it? The object was mapping. Weather conditions were clear from a warm day. February, that was summertime here, so yeah, it would have been a warm day. The observer said that he had a very uneasy feeling. He was afraid and numbed. He hesitated to report the sighting until recently. So on 15th of June, an object was spotted near Wallen. That's sort of similar to that's a little bit further away. It had several lights and flew alongside a car. the mobile phone cut out. Back in 1992, I don't think the mobile phone reception was that fantastic. Several objects floating along with the wind and or the breeze had been reported, but not near the number since Judith McGee exposed the helium-filled balloon-equipped chemical sticks on ABC TV. So that report is an interesting one, that Ballarat report. This is the object, and if you look at what he's written on there, he's written quite a few. This is the witness's sketch. He's done quite a bit. So basically the statement is that it's huge, it's 500 feet wide, the underneath side all black, stealth colour, to fuse with night. So that's an interesting word, isn't it? To fuse with the night. Sky background and stars behind it. So very interesting report there. And we've just got another one to do as well, which is here. This one is in South Australia, sighting at Newton, South Australia. All television transmissions were affected by a UFO between 7:20 p.m. and 8:25 p.m. on the 12th of September 1995. Every television station went blank. Sean Oosting and Deborah Muthu saw and photographed the UFO, but unfortunately used a flash and lost true definition of the object, which was over Adelaide. The area was just below the Adelaide Hills, and they watched the object for 5 minutes. The object was dark grey with red, white, and yellow lights spinning around it in an anti-clockwise rotation, as viewed looking up from below. The object seemed to shoot from nowhere. It arrived quickly to the point where they first saw it, and then appeared to break speed before moving at a constant motion. The object then stayed on a set course, that is, straight ahead, and passed right over where the witnesses were standing. The lights moved in an anti-clockwise direction in the shape of an oval. As the lights flashed around the object, the hull of the craft was lit up. It was here that they noticed that this craft was actually spinning. So what I find interesting about that particular little case is that all the TV sets went on the blink. All the TV stations went out. And that's quite a big one, that one. Like, you do hear of UFOs interfering with radios and TVs, but this is over an entire populated area in Adelaide in South Australia, where this object has seemingly cut out all the transmissions. So that's interesting. And I've got one more, which I think is in the same book. So this is another edition of the Australian UFO Bulletin. Now this one has got a really interesting picture on it too. So that's what they've described in this particular report, that craft. And it says on the 15th of July, this is also in South Australia, Yorktown, South Australia, 1996. Ivan Tomic and his sister Ivana were travelling with their parents in the family car halfway between Yorkton and Port Giles in South Australia. They saw a UFO. The time was 7:15 p.m. and the duration of the sighting lasted about 13 seconds. The object was about the size of a small house and oval in shape. It appeared above the car with blinding green lights. It was about 200 to 300 metres above the car and was making a squeaking noise, as opposed to a shrieking noise or a humming noise. It was making a squeaking noise. When it veered away from the car, it was only 50 to 100 metres above. It was spinning so fast you could not count the lights. If you followed our car, it followed our car for about half a minute and then left toward Edithburgh Jetty. About 1 hour later, at 8 p.m, people fishing at Stansbury Jetty saw the UFO so closely they all ran to their cars. Later at 10 p.m, people met at the club and discussed the UFO sightings. The light was blinding and the craft was spinning. The brightest and noise scared us. I thought they were going to take us away. So that's a very interesting witness picture of what they saw that was scaring the living daylights out of everybody in South Australia. So these little books have got lots and lots of great little Australian and overseas stories in them, and I got a whole heap of them. So we'll keep talking about these old cases, bring them out, bring them into the light. Thank you so much for joining me again for another episode here on a lovely sunny day in Victoria, Australia. And I look forward to seeing you again next week, where we'll do it all again. Have a great night. See you then.